Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Leslie Kendall. I'm the Chief Historian of the Peterson Automotive Museum. And speaking of history, have I got some things in store for you? This isn't just any collection that I'm standing in front of. This collection consists of Ferrari, Porsche, virtually everything in between. If it was European and important in any way to the automobile world, it's here. This is the Rudi Klein collection of automobiles. And we're very fortunate to be here. We're among the first people to get to see this. Now, Rudi Klein was a German expatriate, came to America, and was an automobile repairman. He was a parts gatherer. He was also the kind of person that if he saw a car that was worthwhile, no matter what kind of shape it was in, he thought it would be worth saving. I mean, take a look at this. You have a Ferrari, a 330, a Mercedes 190 SL, Maserati Sebring, a Maserati Mexico, V8 engine derived from the 5000 GT a few years before, Mercedes Cabriolet, and your basic pontoon Mercedes sedan, a 300 SEL 6.3, not to mention a Lotus. Probably one of the more interesting cars here because the body is off of it. You can actually see how it was constructed. So join me as we walk through the Rudi Klein collection, a collection of vehicles that hasn't been seen in 50 years. We're lucky enough to be able to see it now before it's broken up forever. And here we have in front of us a Maybach. Not just any Maybach, the biggest Maybach available during the year on probably what was the longest chassis available at the time. But you start looking closer and you see things that maybe didn't catch your eye at first, but become kind of important once you see them. For example, right-hand drive. We don't know the exact history of this car. It might have been delivered to England or Australia or Japan. We don't know. But what's interesting is that he saved the car. This is not the kind of car that you just junk when the ashtrays are full. And this isn't just any cabriolet, this is a four-door cabriolet. And in Germany, four-door cabriolet is about the most sophisticated that you could get. Because when you put the top down on these incredibly padded roof structures, they sit way up high. So when you're sitting in the back, you're almost surrounded by this kind of protective layer of cloth, this buffer. Inside, very unusual for a four-door convertible, this car has a division window. The crank is right there. It goes up, it goes down. So the car could be used in any number of ways. It could have been chauffeur driven. The car could have been owner driven. You put the division window down, you put the top down. All of a sudden you could drive it around. You could drive your friends, wait for a snowy day in December, bundle up and go off to that Christmas party. Now, most people don't associate Great Britain with exotic cars, but Lotus is a major exception. They had a marvelous four-cylinder, double overhead cam, supercharged engine that was every bit as powerful as any exotic V8 from Italy. A close look at this will reveal that this is not your ordinary body construction. Most exotic cars you think are made of aluminum or steel or today in carbon fiber. But Lotus was using fiberglass. In fact, Lotus was a pioneer in the use of fiberglass. They're the ones that made the first ever fiberglass monocoque body. Now, the Rudi Klein collection contains cars that are juxtapositioned in a way that give you a really interesting look at automotive history. For example, we have a 1970s Maserati Sebring, straight six, double overhead cam, two-plug engine. And to my left, we have the evolution of that. A Maserati Mexico, probably a 4.7 liter, which when new would have had a V8 double overhead cam engine in it, derived from the fantastic Maserati 5000 GT. Now, the Maserati Mexico unfortunately doesn't have its engine, but a quick reveal of its stablemate reveals a double overhead cam, twin plug engine with fuel injection, that may not have been so reliable in the day, but which was a very important step in engineering. Fuel injection in the day was not yet perfected, but it's a very, very important step in the evolution of performance automobiles. Mercedes was the first to have it in 1954 with the 300 SL. And after that, if you didn't have fuel injection, eventually you didn't have all the performance you could have. Now, anyone who likes Porsches is going to be really in luck at the Rudi Klein collection, because he literally has dozens of 356s and dozens of 911s, virtually every kind and every model variation that you can imagine. And we have a chance to see the subtle differences between the early and the late models. For example, the very earliest were shapely. They were very, very curvaceous, whereas when they got a little bit later and the style got to be a little bit more linear with cars in general, Porsche went the same way. So you see the fenders are a little bit more linear. The headlights stick out just a bit more than they did in the early 356s, where they were built in almost flush with the body. We've seen the front. Now, what about the back of the Porsche 356? They're full of subtle differences too. Earliest ones have one grille, later models have two grilles, known as a twin grille. Earlier models, Porsche must have reasoned that they didn't need the kind of air volume that the later models took because of their power. When the Porsches got more and more powerful, they said, you know what, these have to breathe a lot easier than we're giving them a chance to. We better give it two grilles. Now, the number of grills on the engine covers are one way to distinguish old versus new Porsches. But among the old versus new, there are ways to distinguish on the models, the submodels. For example, this car has a 60 on it, which would indicate it's got a 60 horsepower engine. And Porsche thought that was important enough to call out on the badging. Keep in mind, 60 horsepower may not seem like a lot today, but back in the day, back in the late 50s and early 60s, a car with a 4-cylinder engine that put out 60 horsepower was substantial. And Porsche was really starting to feel its stride in the day. They were experimenting with different kinds of engines, the most highly evolved of which would have been the Carrera engine with the double overhead camshafts and the roller bearing crank and all of the little nuances, the carburation, the suspension tweaks that made those so different. Now, a look at the back of a Porsche is just one way that helps us appreciate the variation among the models, because they had double overhead cams, they had high compression versions, they had all different kinds of things. Porsche was about development. And when it went from the 356 to the 911, the big change came, and that's the model that became so important to Porsche. They've been producing it continuously ever since it was introduced. Now, one quick look at this car, and it's instantly recognizable as a Porsche 911. But it really isn't just any 911. It's an extremely early 911, as you can see by the very early badging that this car wore. It was probably still internally called the 901, which is the designation that Porsche originally gave it, until Peugeot came along and said, Porsche, you can't use any 3-digit model designation where 0 is the middle number. We own all those. And Porsche wasn't in a position to argue with gigantic Peugeot in the day, so they said, fine, it's the 911. Now, the Rudi Klein collection doesn't only have Porsches and Mercedes, they also have vehicles like this, an Audi, 1985 by Tresor. It was lengthened wheelbase. It's a marvelous European interpretation of an executive car. And this isn't the only Audi in the collection, because the one I'm going to show you next set the world on fire with its special kind of drive system and the way it excelled in Group B racing ultimately. Now, the special Audi we were talking about is the Audi Quattro. Quattro, which means 4 in Italian, denotes how many wheels are driven on this car. It's an all-wheel drive Audi. It's subtle by American tastes, but this car was a true performance car in the European idiom. As you can see, There are a lot of Mercedes in this collection. We have a 190 SL, a Pagoda, a Coupe, all different kinds, a 600 in the background, long wheelbase limousine. But let's now look at something that is really, really unique, something that I think you'll like. What we're in front of right now is a early 1970s Pantera. In a way, a study in safety engineering, because this car was in a very bad accident, you can tell. But what I really want to show you in this row is this Mercedes-Benz 600 long wheelbase limousine. It's an extraordinary car, one of the most expensive cars in its day and worth every penny. The engineering that is embodied in this car, the hydraulics, the quality of construction is amazing. It's unequaled even today. Now for the Mercedes 600 long wheelbase, you could have gotten virtually any configuration you wanted. If you wanted a limousine with the division, you got it. If you wanted rear-facing occasional seats, you got it. If you wanted a Landaulet body style, you got that too. If you wanted 6 doors on your Mercedes, you could have that. The sky was the limit. This was a car that was intended for presidents, popes, and potentates, the most powerful people on earth. Now moving into the chauffeur's compartment, you can kind of see what makes a Mercedes 600 a Mercedes 600. It's the construction, the quality of materials that they use. They use genuine wood. This is not plastic, genuine leather. But they did think it might be a good idea to use fiberglass down for the map holders and the door pockets. Not a bad thing. Looking inside, you can also see the quality of construction. You can see where the chauffeur was going to spend most of his or her time. And what's interesting about this car and the fact that it's in Southern California, it exemplifies the reality that in the East Coast, cars tend to rot from the bottom up. On the West Coast and in hot climates, they rot from the top down. Well, here we are back in front of a collection of 911s and 912s. But this is where we're going to have to end it for today. You're just going to have to come back and watch the Petersen YouTube channel again for more.